From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston, and this is special coverage of the fourth and final night of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. As we come to air, the majority leader, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, is addressing the convention. Let's listen to what he has to say.
They want to tell you when you can go to work, when your kids can go to school. They want to tax your job out of existence and then send you a government check for unemployment. They want to tell you what kind of car you can drive, what sources of information are credible, and even how many hamburgers you can eat. They want to defund the police and take away your Second Amendment rights. They want free health care for illegal immigrants, yet they offer no protection at all for unborn Americans. They want to pack the Supreme Court with liberals intent on eroding our constitutional rights. And they want to codify all this by making the swamp itself, Washington, D.C., America's 51st state. With two more liberal senators, we cannot undo the damage they've done. Now you understand why Democrats spent an entire week telling us about who Joe Biden is, not what he intends to do. I'm immensely proud of the work the Republican Senate has done. We are the firewall against Nancy Pelosi's agenda. Like President Trump, we won't be bullied by a liberal media intent on destroying America's institutions. We will stand our post on behalf of the millions of Americans whose stories aren't told in today's newspapers, whose struggles are just as real. We'll continue to support American families as we defeat the coronavirus and return our economy to the envy of the world. The stakes have never been higher, which is why I'm asking you to support Republican Senate candidates across the country and re-elect my friend, President Donald Trump.
That was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell addressing the Republican convention. President Trump will formally accept his party's nomination this evening, capping an evening whose theme is America, Land of Greatness. Among those appearing before the president will be his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and a range of speakers addressing issues of national security, law and order, and the economy. But while the convention goes forward, tensions persist in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after the police shooting of Jacob Blake. So we will also hear about the president's efforts in criminal justice reform and what he has done overall for black Americans. With us throughout our coverage are Bloomberg political contributors Jeannie Zaino of Iona College and Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital. So, Jeannie, let's start with you. Listening to Mitch McConnell, who is, by the way, up for re-election. He's a rare creature in this convention. He's a senator who's up for re-election who's speaking. At the same time, and he's making his case, understandably. At the same time, I think we've heard throughout this convention things asserted that I'm not sure what the evidence is for. For example, they will take away your Second Amendment rights. I'm not sure how they'd even do that. Or they're going to tell you how many hamburgers you can eat. I must say, I'm a little perplexed. I didn't even remember that.
That was a new one to me. I had not heard that one yet. And we've heard that repeatedly. We've heard, these arguments, trying to paint Joe Biden into the corner of being this socialist, this progressive. To listen to it, you would think he's a communist. And yet, if we know of anything about Joe Biden, he's very, very moderate in terms of his voting record. And so it's almost as if they want to run against somebody like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC or the Squad, and they ended up with Joe Biden, and they've had to adjust their playbook here. But we're hearing this over and over. It's obviously an attempt to speak to the base and to get the base out, because both sides are fighting to get their base out, because that's where this fight is going to be in these battleground states.
So, Rick Davis, give us some sense. You've run these campaigns. If your opposition is characterizing you, what do you do to really sort of get it back to where you think you are?
Well, you got to first evaluate whether the lie that's told needs to be responded to. There's an old saying in politics, a lie unchallenged becomes the truth. And so the Democrats are going through literally every day of this convention deciding what they're going to respond to and what they're not. As you saw today, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were out in the public talking about some of these lies that they felt needed to be corrected. And that is a typical playbook for politics at this time of a presidential campaign.
Okay, thanks so much to Rick Davis and Jeannie Davis, who will stick with us right through the evening. And now I want to turn to our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Sorley at the White House, because one issue, and we see it here with Mitch McConnell, Kevin, is what's going to happen in the so-called down ballot, particularly with the Senate.
Well, exactly. Leader McConnell at first said he wasn't going to speak at the convention, and then he ultimately decided to speak at the convention. He's in a tough Senate re-election fight in his home state of Kentucky against Amy McGrath. It's not just Kentucky where the polls have tightened over the summer. Look no further than Iowa, where Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican from Iowa, who also spoke at this convention, a veteran, someone with military bona fides, and someone who was largely seen as perhaps the future of the Republican Party. She's in a tough fight with a progressive, far-left candidate, Teresa Greenfield. She's someone who is running on the Elizabeth Warren platform in the Hawkeye state. Why? On issues pertaining to trade and agriculture, this is something that progressives feel they might be able to make up ground on. Elsewhere, Senator Tom Cotton, another individual who spoke here, he's up for re-election. And then Senator Lindsey Graham. Rick Davis knows a thing or two about Senator Graham, the political maverick, former member of the Tres Amigos with the late Senator John McCain, now finds himself neck and neck in a poll with a Democrat, Jamie Harrison, who's really rising. He is an African-American businessman who came from poverty and really upended that South Carolinian race.
So, Kevin, give us a sense. We always knew that the Republicans might have a tougher time because they have more seats basically being contended in this particular election. At the same time, they have their candidate, President Trump. They have to embrace him, don't they? They can't write against him or distance themselves from him.
You know, it's remarkable because back during Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation process, everyone was looking at people like Senator Susan Collins as someone who had to potentially navigate some pretty treacherous political waters and navigate that tightrope. It's typical at any convention for the incumbent to have to face photo dodges from members of their own party in terms of folks running in more moderate states that want to try to distance themselves. But beyond that, this is the final point that I would make on this, David. The down ballot races really are going to decide really not just the direction of policy, but also procedure for several years to come. Should Democrats obtain a supermajority and the White House, by all accounts, the filibuster rule, the filibuster rule could be thrown out the window. And that really could have severe implications when you've got former President Obama saying that he would want to get rid of some of those Senate procedural rules and just go to a majority vote. So much is at stake, not just who's going to win the White House.
That's a really powerful point. Thank you so much to our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Swirly, who will be with us through the evening. For more on what we can expect now from President Trump's acceptance speech, it's the headliner tonight, after all. Let's bring in Bloomberg White House reporter. He's Mario Parker. So what do we expect from the president?
Well, we expect, based off of excerpts that we received earlier, we expect the president to hit Joe Biden pretty hard on China. We expect him to hit him pretty hard on immigration. And we expect him to paint Joe Biden as this vessel of the radical wing of the Democrat Party. And the president will paint himself as this defender of traditional American values.
Thank you so much to Mario Parker. We'll be coming back tomorrow as well through the evening. And now we turn back to Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. Rick, what are you expecting from the president tonight? What does he need to do? What does he want to do?
Well, first, he's going to do a victory lap, right? He's going to say, I kept my promises. I made all these promises during the campaign last 4 years ago, and here's my deal. I cut taxes. You know, I changed regulations. I built a wall on the border. He's going to rip through that stuff because, after all, I mean, in his mind, he has kept his promises to his voters, and he wants to deliver for them. Then I think he's going to take a pretty good shot at Joe Biden, as Mario just pointed out. I think he's going to try and capture this theme that we've seen all during the week, that Biden is a captive of the liberal left of the Democratic Party, that, you know, he can't even speak his own mind without checking with Bernie Sanders, and that those policies are going to create a bifurcated America, where there's the Joe Biden America, which is dangerous and risky and a place full of crime and upheaval. And then there's the Donald Trump America, which, you know, having been a part of the Reagan campaigns, I think he's going to take morning in America one step further. And so I think that you're going to see that kind of bifurcation process. And where he winds up, the big question is, how much is he going to stick his neck out for the next 4 years and what he's willing to promise to voters to get a second term? Yeah,
Gina, Rick makes an interesting analogy to the Morning America back in 1980. He is running against himself. He's the incumbent. He's not running against a Democrat who was in office.
Yeah, and we know that President Trump is much more comfortable running as a challenger, and embracing this incumbency, I think, has been a challenge. He likes to embrace the aspects of it, the look of it, but the actual owning of what happens in Wisconsin has happened under your watch, I think has been harder for him. And that's what I'm most interested to see. I can't remember a convention, and I don't know if you or Rick can, where the country was facing so many crises at the same time. Not just the hurricane, but you've got a pandemic, you've got an economy that's in turmoil, and you've got this racial unrest. And the president simply can't, at least I don't believe he can, ignore those. But how he addresses those when he has been the president through the pandemic, through the economic crisis, and the racial unrest, and many Americans believe he stoked that racial unrest. I'm very curious to see how he threads that needle.
Yeah, well, we'll be hearing from Ben Carson later, a part of that, I think. Coming up, part of my interview with U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. This is coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Number of big ideas.
This is an age of science, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. Welcome back to special coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. President Trump came to office promising to change U.S. trade relations all around the world. Our colleague Kaylee Lyons has a report on what he got done in his first 4 years.
Well, David, trade has dominated the narrative for both the market and this president throughout his first term. He has relied heavily on tariffs. He has criticized free trade, and he has favored bilateral rather than multilateral trade deals, including with China, which he has been very hard on. Now, we did get a phase one trade deal with China inked in January. The president has heavily touted that, but it came at a cost. And you spoke to Douglas Holtz-Eakin of the American Action Forum about that earlier this week. Take a listen to what he had to say.
People give him credit for confronting China. China's a known bad actor. Previous efforts by Bush administration, Obama administration had not yielded anything really. And so he gets credit for doing that, even though I think it was a negative from the point of view of maintaining the momentum he had built in the U.S. economy.
David, we know the trade war has been incredibly disruptive to companies from a supply chain perspective as well as to financial markets. They got some reassurance this week when both sides reaffirmed their commitment to the deal. But the reality is China still has a long way to go to fulfill its promises. If you take a look at the $171 billion worth of goods they are supposed to buy by the end of this year, they've actually only bought about 28% of that target across manufacturing, agricultural products, and energy. They would need to buy $130 billion more by the end of this year to fulfill their initial promises. And then aside from trade, There are plenty of other tensions with China. You have security and data issues, Hong Kong, and the South China Sea, as we've seen escalate this week. And our team at Bloomberg Economics tried to plot the attitude towards China on a chart relative to what President Trump has been, what a potential President Biden could be, and President Obama. They ranged it on strategy from containment to engagement, and then on tactic from broad and uncertain to targeted to narrow and procedural. They found that President Obama was in that procedural engagement camp. Biden, they think would be somewhere in the middle, but the president is all the way in that unpredictable containment camp. And if there's anything we know about the markets, David, it's that they do not like unpredictability. They do not like uncertainty, especially when it comes to the world's two largest economies. David.
That is a great chart. Well done. Thank you so much to Bloomberg Scale Alliance. We'll be back later on in the program. Earlier today, I spoke with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross for his views on the Trump administration's approach to trade and what we could expect in a possible second term.
Well, in terms of China, a lot has been accomplished. On the enforcement side, we really have been enforcing quite vigorously. You're familiar with the actions we've taken on Huawei. You're familiar with the actions that we've taken on ZTE, two major telecom companies. Most recently, we've been working very hard on the semiconductor part of things, because while China does have technology, we still have the best software design and the best fabrication equipment for semiconductors. So we're trying to avoid them taking unfair advantage of our technology. Technology is really important because while protecting things like steel and aluminum help take care of today's world, technology is tomorrow's world. So that's a big deal. Very recently, we put on the entity list of 500 companies since 2017. Awful lot of those are Chinese companies, and that's because they are the ones that seem to be doing the most to violate sanctions, to violate human rights, and most recently also to create problems in Hong Kong. So that's been a big, big series. And then, of course, you have the tariffs, the Section 301 tariffs that USTR imposed on China. So the cumulative effect of all this is enormously greater than the long-term cumulative effect of everything that had been done pre-Trump.
So, Mr. Secretary, speaking of China and technology for the moment, we have the TikTok issue that is pending, as I understand it.
Yes.
And there are various companies now who have expressed an interest. I'm told Microsoft, Walmart, and Oracle have all expressed an interest. As you look at these possible alternatives, what are the criteria you use in deciding which, if any, of these make sense from the U.S.'s point of view?
Well, the fundamental idea is that we don't want detailed personal information on all of our teenage children who are the main users of TikTok. We don't want that information to become part of a big Chinese database to use to infiltrate our country. So that's the principal objective. Whether it should be Microsoft or Oracle or someone else, that's really more for the private sector to decide. The TikTok people are essentially operating in the U.S. and a couple of other non-Chinese countries. TikTok, as I understand it, does not really operate in China. So there'll be no particular impact on Chinese apps as a result of whatever we do with TikTok. My own personal preference would be to have TikTok acquired by one of these American companies. And I think that would have the fringe benefit not only of helping from a national security point of view, but creating more competition in the areas of Facebook and social media. That's a healthy thing. Competition is a very good thing. That's kind of what makes American industry thrive.
That was part of my interview earlier with Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. For a view from China on U.S.-China trade relations, welcome now Tom McKenzie. He's co-anchor of Bloomberg China Open. Tom?
David, just to respond to what Wilbur Ross was telling you there is a flip side, of course, to the actions that the US has taken, particularly on technology. And certainly they have taken a sledgehammer to the likes of Huawei, which is really feeling the pain of these actions. But the flip side is that China has doubled down on its own indigenous innovations, spending very heavily on things like R&D, particularly in the semiconductor space, particularly around foundries and silicon. Now, the experts you speak to here say that still China is at least a minimum of 5 to 10 years away from catching up with the US in terms of the most sophisticated chips, but certainly it has led to that increase of investment here. The other thing that has been certainly in focus, and you were discussing this 5 to 10 minutes ago here in China this week, has been the military maneuvers between China and the US over the last 4 or 5 days. Most recently, you've had reports from the Chinese military saying that they expelled a guided missile warship, US missile warship, from the South China Sea, from an area around the Paracel Islands. After the warship entered that area, apparently China sent its own navy and its aircraft to buzz that warship and force it out of those waters. That comes after China fired, by the way, 4 medium-range missiles into the South China Sea. It comes after a spy plane, a US spy plane, flew over a no-fly zone in northern China, disrupting a military exercise there. So the military tensions are clear as well. They have certainly been in the spotlight this week. And the risk is, of course, that you get an accident that then leads to some kind of military conflagration. And you saw that in 2001 with the collision of a spy plane, a US spy plane, and a Chinese warplane. So that is something certainly the military experts point to as a potential risk in the South China Sea, but also the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, Tom, thank you so very much. Always great to have Tom McKenzie with us. He's co-anchor of Bloomberg Asia China Open, beg your pardon. Coming up, more from the RNC. We're awaiting a speech from HUD Secretary Ben Carson. This is coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio.
4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted, or set on fire. As the officer wellness coordinator,
How have you changed your activities in the month and a half or so since the implementation of the law?
Before any evidence, they just claim presume that I'm guilty. So, this is not the way the law is. I should be presumed innocent. And one thing I can say from the statement they made is, we have never support independence of Hong Kong.
The Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office under the State Council puts this statement out before you've even been officially charged, before there's a trial, before there is a verdict. Do you feel you can get a fair trial here?
Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. All this we are guaranteed in our basic law, which has been what we are fighting for. No more, no less.
When I tried to raise my voice, instead of being applauded for strong leadership, I was criticized for it. I made it to the table, but I was still expected to conform to gender stereotype.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Welcome back to special coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Western. We are waiting right now for Ben Carson, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, for his remarks to the convention. And while we wait, Jeannie, I want any thoughts you have on Ben Carson, an accomplished doctor, physician, but also in charge of a very important agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, his remarks are very much in keeping with what we've seen throughout the convention, which is they're trying to make the case that the Democrats claim that the Republican Party is racist is not the case. case and that they're a very diverse group. And of course, you know, Clarence Henderson last night, Vernon Jones, and of course, probably the most prominent African-American, or one of them in the party, is Dr. Ben Carson, who's not only a neurosurgeon, but also has now led HUD for President Trump, and they have remained very close. So I think he's going to serve several roles, including paying testament to the fact that he's worked with the president and he has, you know, knows the president in a way that other people don't. And I think it's also important, you know, obviously not only leading HUD, but given what's going on with the pandemic, that this renowned neurosurgeon can potentially speak to that as well.
Thank you so much, Jeannie Zaino. And now we go to the convention and Dr. Ben Carson.
I'm Ben Carson, a retired neurosurgeon and a public servant. Before I begin, I'd like to say that our hearts go out to the Blake family and the other families who've been impacted by the tragic events in Kenosha. As Jacob's mother has urged the country, let's use our hearts, our love, and our intelligence to work together to show the rest of the world how humans are supposed to treat each other. America is great when we behave greatly. In order to succeed in change, we must first come together in love of our fellow citizens. History reminds us that necessary change comes through hope and love, not senseless and destructive violence. Abraham Lincoln once said to an America divided that, quote, "Your purpose then, plainly stated, is that you will destroy the government unless you be allowed to construe and enforce the Constitution as you please on all points in dispute between you and us. You will rule or ruin in all events," unquote. These words of warning are relevant today. We have a choice. Do we want big government that controls our lives from cradle to grave? Or do we believe in the power and wisdom of the people and their ability to self-govern with help from a limited federal government? Our president, Donald J. Trump, believes in the people. He is one of us. He makes promises and he keeps them. He is transparent, and we certainly know what he's thinking. He does not submit to political correctness or to its enforcers, the media. He is real. Right now, we need real. We need courage. We can't cower in the corner and hope that no one calls us a name, believing that will keep us safe. That is not courage, and that will not lead us to a good and just place. We must remember all those who sacrificed everything in order to give us freedom, and we must be willing to do the same for those who come after us. President Trump does not dabble in identity politics. He wants everyone to succeed and believes in the adage, "A rising tide lifts all boats." Many on the other side love to incite division by claiming that President Trump is a racist. They could not be more wrong. Years ago, Jesse Jackson gave Donald Trump an award for the economic opportunities he created for black people. In Palm Beach, Florida, Donald Trump led the crusade to allow blacks and Jews into private clubs and resorts. One of the first things he did as president was bring the Office of Historically Black Colleges and Universities into the White House so that it could get proper attention and financial support. Before the pandemic, African American unemployment was at an all-time low. President Trump accomplished prison reform. He created incentives to encourage investors to become involved with economically deprived areas of America. He strongly supports school choice, fully recognizing that no matter what circumstances a person is born into, they can achieve success with a good education. It was true for me. When my mother forced me to read books about doctors, entrepreneurs, inventors, and scientists, I began to recognize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. My mother always told me, Ben, you can do anything, but I will never allow you to become a victim. It was then that I stopped listening to the people who were trying to convince me that I was a victim and that others were responsible for my victimhood. What is racist is the fact that African Americans have the highest abortion rate. President Trump is the most pro-life president in the country's history. He will continue to fight for those who cannot yet speak. The vision of a shining city up on a hill came from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. America is that shiny city. We are the beacon of hope for the world. At this moment in time, President Donald Trump is the man with the courage, the vision, and the ability to keep it shining brightly.
You have been listening to Dr. Ben Carson. He is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development addressing the Republican National Convention. So we want to turn now to Rick Davis. Rick, I am struck by the fact that he did specifically address the shooting of a Kenosha, saying that the hearts go out to the family, but also that the only way we can have real change is through hope and love, not senseless violence.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the very few people who have actually recognized what's going on in Kenosha and what's happening really in the cities around the country and, frankly, in the culture, which includes our sports teams and people like that who are trying to bring attention to this issue. The other thing he didn't bring up was coronavirus. He was just recently appointed to the President's Coronavirus Task Force, and I would have thought that he'd use an opportunity like this to reinforce the message. But tonight's really the message by the Secretary was to reinforce this notion that Donald Trump is not a racist. We've heard this over and over and over throughout the convention, and they clearly are worried about that, and they're addressing it with every chance they can. So it was a very mixed bag of things that Secretary Carson brought to the table today, but notable for missing an opportunity as a coronavirus task force member to say something.
It's a really good point, Rick. Thank you so much. Rick Davis, along with Jeannie Zaino, will be staying with us. But in the meantime, while Secretary Carson was speaking, we had an open over in China. So let's get the latest on the markets from Sophie Cameron over in Hong Kong. Sophie?
David, ahead of President Trump's convention speech, which will no doubt feature China prominently, we are seeing the offshore yuan holding below 6.90 and PIMCO seeing the currency outperforming in Asia amid the cyclical recovery that's anticipated in the region. And in the open on China, we do have Shanghai shares opening lower, but we do have that index set for a third monthly gain. And check out that tech-heavy Chinex gaining ground at the end of a week that has minted 3 new billionaires in China amid the IPO frenzy. Now, here in Hong Kong, we are seeing fluctuations for stocks at the start of cash trade with tech under pressure. And Chinese banks are in focus with earnings on tap from the sector. Rising bond and loan default risks are seen in denting profits. Now, switching up the board, the PBOC's shift towards curbing debt expansion and the lack of aggressive policy easing is ramping up debt repayment pressures for distressed borrowers in China. Private firms and property developers are particularly vulnerable amid rising funding costs. And changing up the board once more, tight liquidity concerns are fueling a climb in Chinese yields with the 10-year now at a July 9th high. And after the Fed's pivot on inflation, which paves the way for a lower for longer rate era, David, Asian bonds are falling with yield curves tracking that steepening that we're seeing in treasuries. David.
Thank you so much to Bloomberg's Sophie Cameron over in Hong Kong. Coming up, we're going to take a look at what the president has done and hopes to do when it comes to our taxes. This is coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
True diversification. That's what adding commodities exposure to your stock and bond portfolio can help provide. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is the standard for commodity market exposure. 23 traded commodities are represented: agriculture, livestock, metals, and energy. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is the benchmark most widely used by investment professionals globally. Track your commodity investments with a proven financial information partner. The Bloomberg Commodity Index. True diversification.
We're helping them also with some surgical masks. That was some of the latest discussions that we had, and open up some new capacity to make those. But we're continuing to have discussions and trying to help the country in any way that we possibly can.
Welcome back to special coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. One of the things that President Trump is proudest of are the huge tax cuts enacted at the end of his first year in office. And he promises to do even more. To give us a review, we welcome once again now our colleague Kaylee Lines.
Well, David, tax policy is front and center for the financial markets in this election. President Trump wants to keep corporate taxes low. He wants to lower payroll taxes and cut the capital gains tax to 15%. Largely, this is welcome ideas to Wall Street. The question is, do we actually need it? You spoke to Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City and an advisor to President Trump about that. Here is what he had to say.
When we started talking to business people, big and small, they were telling us we'd rather have regulatory relief than tax cuts. We're getting killed more with regulation than we are with tax cut. I don't know that we need another tax cut. I believe he thinks we do, and he knows more about it than I do. I sure know one thing: we don't need a big tax increase right now.
So that's one view. We don't need higher taxes, and that is part of the street's concern when it comes to candidate Biden's proposals, who wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28% or by about a third. I want to point to research from RBC, which finds that the corporate tax rate, or the effective corporate tax rate, just before the pandemic was sitting around 17%, far below the 23% rate where it was when President Trump was elected. Now, that decline in large part is thanks to the sweeping tax reform the president passed in the first half of his term. This clearly favors companies. It saves corporations an estimated 7% in after-tax income that they would lose under a Biden administration, according to RBC. But on the capital gains tax, there's a little bit more debate, many arguing that it disproportionately favors the wealthy. And according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, in 2020, the benefit distribution from lower capital gains and stock dividends taxes is stacked all the way at the far end of the spectrum. 78% of the gain went to the wealthiest 1%. For the poorest 20%, second poorest 20%, and middle 20%, they received virtually no benefit at all. So as the president tries to make the case that his tax policy will help the middle class, this is something that he has to square. David.
Thank you so much to Kayla Lines, who will be back again during the program. For more on President Trump's tax policy agenda, we welcome now Maddie Duppler. She is founder and president of Forward Strategies and a senior fellow for fiscal policy at the National Taxpayers Union. We also are still joined, of course, by our contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zeno. So, Maddie, give us a sense, really, if there were substantial new tax cuts involving both capital gains and payroll tax, what would the effect be on the economy?
Well, that's up for debate, but an effective tax cut on the capital gains rate could flow through to other people who are not just holders of assets like stocks. I saw your piece earlier there saying that it just flows to the high income earners. Now, remember, capital gains are not just taxes paid on people who are selling stocks. You sell your home and you make a gain on that. You are owed capital gains as a result of that. The other thinking on a capital gains tax cut is that loosens up capital in the economy that flows through to other more productive uses. That's really where you would see the effect if there was a capital gains tax cut. You would allow for more capital to be unlocked, to be invested elsewhere. We saw this with the cut in the corporate tax rate. When you cut the corporate tax rate, you have more capital for corporations to use to invest in their economies here. That eventually flows down to workers and it results in an increase in wages, which we saw for the first time after the tax cut in 2017. So when you're talking about cutting the capital gains tax rate, yes, of course, the direct benefit would potentially go to people who are direct holders of assets, but the residual effects of that could be actually quite immense, depending on the amount of the capital gains tax cut, as well as the duration of it. Of course, we saw in 2001, 2003, the cut in capital gains rate was temporary at that point. Yep. Something that is just temporary in nature, people might sit on their capital a little bit longer, but something that's permanent could have a growth effect for sure.
Maddie, it's Jeannie Zeno. So when you think about small businesses, which have been so decimated by COVID-19 and the pandemic, what would you suggest that the president or Joe Biden, should he be elected, what's the first thing you think should happen to help those small businesses that have been so decimated in the pandemic and still seem to be struggling?
Well, certainly for businesses, the challenge right now is the lack of certainty. They need to know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks and months, not even discounting the fact that we've got the coronavirus crisis still weighing heavily on small businesses. This is something that businesses always need in times of economic certainty. With the added factor of this public health uncertainty, businesses really need to know that there's going to be security there for them when they're talking about keeping their workers on payroll and looking until the end of the year. You know, the Trump administration, of course, issued that payroll tax cut as a result of an executive order, but the devil is in the details. The question is what happens when that executive order expires, regardless of who's in the White House, because we don't know when those tax liabilities will eventually come due, and of course, who will be responsible for paying them. So I think small businesses right now would really be looking from leadership, both from Congress and from the White House, for certainty about the economic environment. There's a couple of things that were started in the CARES Act that I think could be extended that could give them that certainty, an extension of the PPP loans, more ability for businesses to claim the employee retention tax credit, that sort of thing.
Hey, Maddie, this is Rick Davis in Washington. Good to see you tonight. Speaking of fiscal policy, back to Capitol Hill. I mean, we know probably both of the candidates, regardless who's elected president, are going to have some kind of a stimulus package in the first quarter of next year. And you can imagine that'll drive most of the spending. But at some point, the economy is going to recover, we hope. And at what time does the Hill and especially our fiscal hawk Republicans start looking at these deficits and say, wait a minute, you know, these deficits are a problem and they're going to restrain our growth and we got to do something about it?
Well, Rick, my hope is that the discussion right now offers a better landscape for both Republicans and Democrats to talk about the need for fiscal space when it comes to emergencies like this. I mean, both Republicans and Democrats have always said that the federal government certainly has a role to play in emergencies. And what we're experiencing with coronavirus, I think, certainly qualifies as an immense emergency and acute contraction in the economy, the likes of which we've never seen before. So it makes sense that the federal government has had to respond exigently to this. But I think it proves the point of fiscal conservatives who have said that we need to make sure that we are applying scrutiny to spending across the entire budget in times of normalcy, because if you don't do it, then it becomes that much more difficult to have the fiscal space to make the important decisions when times are dire like they are right now. I think it certainly makes sense for Congress to continue to respond to the coronavirus, for there to be another relief package to help those small businesses and those employers as they face so much uncertainty headed into the winter. But you're right, we need to make sure that there's enough space and conversation at the end of that to talk about having a little bit more scrutiny applied to federal spending.
Maddie, great to have you with us as always. That's Maddie Duppler. She's founder and president of Forward Strategies and senior fellow for fiscal policy at the National Taxpayers Union. Our contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino are still with us, and we are now about to go back to the convention where we're due to hear from Republican Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, as the convention seems to be turning from a law and order theme under former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani over to national security with Senator Tom Cotton. So we will be listening to the senator as he comes to the podium. So, Rick Davis, why don't you just give us a quick thought on Tom Cotton?
Well, you know, Tom distinguished himself, by being in the military, served in Iraq, and came back, ran for office, and he's been a real interventionist when it comes to Capitol Hill. And then Donald Trump comes along, and Rick looks like he's about to tell us himself.
Yeah, we're going to hear it right now.
Good evening. I'm Senator Tom Cotton. A lot's changed in 4 years. Back then, we gathered in a rowdy arena. Tonight, you're probably at home, while I stand alone. Stands alone. That was the motto of my old Army unit, the 506th Infantry, the original band of brothers. From the Normandy beaches to the Iraqi desert, we fought alongside each other, but we were always prepared to stand alone. And so it is with our nation. We lead the free world, but we'll stand alone if we must to defend America. Donald Trump understands this. He puts America first. That's why America is safer now than 4 years ago. But Joe Biden would return us to a weak and dangerous past. Barack Obama's own Secretary of Defense said Joe Biden has been wrong on nearly every major national security decision over the past 4 decades. So let's compare the records of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden slashed defense spending again and again. President Trump rebuilt our military and added the Space Force. Joe Biden let ISIS terrorists rampage across the Middle East. President Trump eliminated ISIS's leader and destroyed its caliphate. Joe Biden opposed the mission to kill Osama bin Laden. President Trump avenged the murder of hundreds of Americans by killing Iran's terrorist mastermind, Qasem Soleimani. Joe Biden sent pallets of cash to the Ayatollahs. President Trump ripped up the dangerous Iran nuclear deal. Joe Biden treated Israel like a nuisance. President Trump moved our embassy to Jerusalem and brokered peace deals in the Middle East. Joe Biden coddled socialist dictators in Cuba and Venezuela. President Trump fights against communism in America's backyard and around the world. And on the Communist Party of China, there is no comparison. Joe Biden aided and abetted China's rise for 50 years with terrible trade deals that closed our factories and laid off our workers. President Trump stands up to China's cheating and stealing and lying. Joe Biden allowed Chinese fentanyl to flood across our southern border. President Trump sanctioned Chinese drug dealers for poisoning our kids. Joe Biden said Chinese communists aren't even our competitor, aren't bad folks. Just months before they unleashed this plague on the world. President Trump is clear-eyed about the Chinese threat, and he is making China pay. But China's not giving up. In fact, they're rooting for Joe Biden. America's other enemies won't give up either. But Joe Biden would be as wrong and weak over the next 4 years as he has been for the last 50. We need a president who stands up for America, not one who takes a knee. A strong and proud America is a safe America, safe from our enemies and safe from war. No one who's seen the face of war desires to see it again. Too many of our fellow Americans are already honored at the hallowed grounds of Arlington. But if we want peace, we must be strong. Weakness is provocative. President Trump's strength has kept us out of war. Joe Biden won't stand up for America. Donald Trump will. So this November, let's stand with the president and vote to keep America great.
That is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas concluding his remarks to the Republican National Committee. A quick reaction from Jeannie Zaino.
Yeah, another potential 2024 candidate, very, very young, very conservative, a veteran, really strong in terms of law enforcement and law and order. And you can see him there contrasting Joe Biden's foreign policy or his view of it with what he sees as Donald Trump's strength, and talking a lot about China, a lot about the Middle East, and going around the world to make the case with Joe Biden, we're going to be insecure.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeannie Zaino. Rick Davis is all going to be staying with us as we continue our special coverage of the Republican National Convention. This is Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Commercial real estate is getting pummeled by the pandemic. Uncertainty has paralyzed the market, and despite hints of hope, there's fears it may get worse.
It's fair to say, I don't know that we've necessarily hit bottom yet.
I'm Lisa Abramowitz. Join me for The Real Estate Reckoning, a special report this weekend on Bloomberg Television.
This is special coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. President Trump is a student of television, and inevitably, one of his measures of success is the ratings. To give us a sense of what the ratings have been through the first 3 nights of this convention, we welcome now our chief Washington correspondent and anchor of Sound On every afternoon on Bloomberg Radio. He is, of course, Kevin Cirilli. So, Kevin, how is Nielsen treating the president this week?
Well, not so good, especially compared to how Democrats fared last week. In fact, Republicans have dipped in the ratings, comparatively speaking, to last week's virtual Democratic National Convention. And quite honestly, they've also trended downward in terms of what's gone on for last cycle, considerably by millions of voters. But the bottom line here, David, is that in terms of the broader trend, when I talk to Republicans and Democrats, and in fact, just before coming on air, I was speaking to one inside of the White House who said this convention cycle might actually dramatically reshape how Americans not only view and consume the political conventions, but also how the parties organize them. You could have a situation 4 years from now where many of the basis for how these conventions were conducted could become the norm.
Hey, Kevin, this is Rick Davis. I think it's fascinating that not only have the viewership been depressed, but that the Democratic convention, which I think was less well produced than what I've seen at the Republican convention so far, actually had higher ratings. And I think that, did you have any data on the social media aspect of this? Because we know that that was popping higher during the Democratic convention. Maybe the fundamental change isn't the convention itself, but just how people view it.
Well, you know, that's such a good point, because in terms of actually where it goes, in terms of just how people are consuming this, the Democrats were able to triple the digital imprint in terms of how they were precisely going to be able to consume this. But beyond that, Republicans are also saying that they've made significant inroads, significant gains in terms of digital viewership. But both parties, Rick, and you know this, are playing to the viral moment. They're playing to be able to catapult some of these moments into fundraising and into other imprints. So it really is interesting, but whether or not it has the same effect as, say, what's happening in Wisconsin, which has really been injected into the speeches this week, or even Hurricane Laura, which has also been injected into these speeches, I think one could make the case that those two events have had just as much of an impact on this race than either of the conventions did.
Yeah, Kevin, you just said, I was just thinking about this. Have there really been any viral moments out of the convention? It seems like some have come in via Wisconsin or the hurricane. And you could say the same thing, I think, about the Democratic convention. I mean, the Republican convention, they didn't even have a party platform to vote on. So it becomes more of like a long infomercial versus something where you're getting sort of this excitement or energy we've seen in conventions past. And I wonder what that says about what we're going to see in 4 years from now.
And honestly, I think probably what went the most unnoticed is something that I underlined in my notebook earlier today, Jeannie, which is Joe Biden, speaking to fundraisers earlier today, said that he is fully preparing to potentially hit the campaign trail in just a couple of weeks in battleground states where they would be able to work within CDC guidelines. So Joe Biden now suggesting that he is in fact going to have to get out on the campaign trail. This after, to your point, maybe these conventions were less memorable than we think.
Thanks so much to Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli. Our contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino will be sticking with us. And right now, we are waiting for Alice Johnson to address the convention. Alice Johnson was serving a life sentence for nonviolent drug crimes when President Trump heard about her situation and commuted her sentence. And now she is going to be speaking, I believe, about criminal justice reform, something that has been important to this president who made real progress in that area. Rick, just as we're waiting for Alice Johnson, I'm not sure that President Trump always gets the credit for this. And was Jared Kushner actually behind this?
Well, Kim Kardashian West was the one who was really behind it. She campaigned hard on this, took it to Jared and Ivanka, and I think through that, we're able to get this on Donald Trump's plate. So I think this is as close to being a celebrity clemency as you can get.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It's pretty touching, actually, Jeannie.
It's a very touching story. And Donald Trump does deserve credit for the criminal justice bill.
Yes.
I mean, and along with a lot of other people. That was a major milestone.
And here is Alice Johnson right now.
Good evening. I'm Alice Marie Johnson. I was once told that the only way I would ever be reunited with my family would be as a corpse. but by the grace of God and the compassion of President Donald John Trump, I stand before you tonight, and I assure you, I'm not a ghost. I am alive, I am well, and most importantly, I am free. In 1996, I began serving time in prison, life plus 25 years. I had never been in trouble. I was a first-time nonviolent offender. What I did was wrong. I made decisions that I regret. Some say, you do the crime, you do the time. However, that time should be fair and just. We've all made mistakes. None of us want to be defined forever based on our worst decision. While in prison, I became a playwright, a mentor, a certified hospice volunteer, an ordained minister, and received the Special Olympics Event Coordinator of the Year award for my work with disabled women. Because the only thing worse than unjustly imprisoning my body is trying to imprison my mind. My transformation was described as extraordinary. Truth is, there are thousands of people just like me who deserve the opportunity to come home. I never stopped fighting for my freedom. My Christian faith and the prayers of so many kept hope alive. When President Trump heard about me, about the injustice of my story, he saw me as a person. He had compassion, and he acted. Free in body thanks to President Trump, but free in mind thanks to the Almighty God. I couldn't believe it. I always remembered that God knew my name, even in my darkest hour, but I never thought a president would. When I was released on June 6, 2018, I ran across that road and hugged my grandchildren for the first time. I'll never forget that feeling. And then I remembered the promise I had made to the men and women I left behind, that I would never stop fighting for them, and I haven't. I'm using my voice to tell their stories, and I pray that my face reminds you of those forgotten faces. 6 months after President Trump granted me a second chance, he signed the First Step Act into law. It was real justice reform, and it brought joy, hope, and freedom to thousands of well-deserving people. I hollered, hallelujah! My faith in justice and mercy was rewarded. Imagine getting to hug your loved ones again and to think this first step meant so much to so many. I can't wait because we're just getting started. The nearly 22 years I spent in prison were not wasted. God had a purpose and a plan for my life. I was not delayed or denied. I was destined for such a time as this. I pray that you will not just hear this message, but that you will be inspired by my story, and your compassion will lead you to take action for those who are forgotten. That's what our president, Donald Trump, did for me. And for that, I will be forever grateful. God bless you. God bless President Trump. And God bless America. Thank you.
That is Ms. Alice Johnson, a Memphis grandmother whose life sentence on federal drug charges was commuted last year by President Donald Trump at the urging of Kim Kardashian West. concluding her remarks at the Republican National Convention. Now we're going to turn to Nevada. That is a state that was solidly in the Republican column until the late 1980s, but is now a true battleground state. Welcome now someone who knows Nevada politics well. He is Dean Heller. He served for 8 years as its Republican senator. Still with us are our contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. So, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Give us your sense right now of Nevada, where it stands in this election.
Well, I was at a RNC convention party yesterday in northern Nevada. Had an opportunity to talk to a number of Republicans. I think the base is still there. You can tell by the convention today that the purpose of it is to try to expand that base. I think they spent the first 3 days trying to solidify that base. They've done it. Now it's time to reach out. That last speaker that you guys just had on, Alice, did a great job. But you can see they're trying to push this now beyond the base. And time will tell. We'll know here probably within the next few days with some polling data out there how well it works.
So, Senator, you know your state terribly well. My understanding is part of the reason that Nevada has been shifting, as it appears to have done in recent elections, is there's been a change actually in the demography, people moving into the states and people living in the state. Give us a sense of how the demographics are driving the politics.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. Things are actually really changing here in the state of Nevada. People are really trying to get away from California. And you can see with the technology and the data-driven diversity that we're doing in the economy here throughout the state, we're getting a lot of new companies coming in from the Bay Area and Los Angeles. They're bringing their workforce with us. These are good people, but they have a tendency of bringing their voting habits with them. So they may want to get out of California, but they seem to want the same laws. So anyway, it is changing. It is changing, and it's making it quite difficult for the conservative voice to get out there. Just means we have to work harder. And as long as we're committed to do that, I think we're going to be just fine.
Senator Heller, how are people on the ground in Nevada feeling about the security of their vote as they look towards the general election? There is some consternation across the country, but I've noticed some coming out of your state specifically. Are you hearing some of that?
It's probably right now, this is Jeannie, correct?
This is.
This is probably the number one issue right here in the state of Nevada. They just changed our election laws, allowing for vote harvesting, meaning that a stranger can come into your home, help you vote, and then walk out of your home with your ballot. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that scenario? You know, Jeannie, that has been a felony since the 1990s here in the state of Nevada. The legislature just turned it into good governance. But there's a lot of people that are really concerned about what this vote harvesting is going to mean and what impact it's going to have on a viable election here in Nevada.
Hey, Senator, this is Rick Davis from Washington. Good to see you tonight. And I wanted to ask you about the economy in Clark County. I mean, Clark County is like a critical county for us Republicans, and no industries were hurt more through the COVID than hotels and restaurants, of which I think Nevada and Clark County is ground zero for the most employees in this category per capita in the world, probably. Is it recovering? How's it looking? And is that impact going to be felt in the election?
Actually, Rick, that's probably the most important economic question that we have in the state of Nevada right now. As you've seen the data, they're anticipating that 25% of the hotels chains out there are behind in their rent payments and making their mortgage payments. No difference in Las Vegas. You know, we used to have 40 million people come into Las Vegas every year, and we're seeing maybe a fraction of that, 20%, 25% of people are willing to get on an airplane to fly into Las Vegas. Right now, we have about 11 hotels, major hotels in Las Vegas that aren't even open because there's not enough business to keep them open. And they're trying to draw people onto the Strip and to get to some of the more some of the other casinos where they can get a traffic out there. But it's difficult. I'll tell you right now, Rick, if they tell you that the unemployment in the state of Nevada is 12.5%, double it, and you're probably close to where we are right now in the state of Nevada.
So, Senator, if I could just follow up, I mean, how do you think that falls on political levels? I mean, obviously, part of Donald Trump's record as president so far has been to be able to create jobs. He ran on that. It was one of his kept promises until COVID. Is that unemployment, is that advantage Democrats, or are they going to say, well, the guy who's going to bring us back is going to be Trump, so I'm going that way?
Right. That's a great question, and I'm not quite sure. I do know this, that Trump has a business plan that's out there today. He wants to create 10 million jobs in the next 10 months, and he wants to create 1 million new businesses in that same period of time. Now, tell me what Biden's plan is. His plan is to convince you that he's not Donald Trump and thinks that may get him elected. But he has no business plan out there. And if you look at the markets right now, I think the stock market trading at the highs that it's at right now is already discounting. I think they believe Trump's going to win. But to be more specific in answering your question, in the month of July, we had the new reports for new voter registration in the state of Nevada. More Republicans registered in Nevada than Democrats. And this is what happens, I think, when you weaken the culinary unions, the teachers unions, with so many people unemployed right now, they have less volunteers to get out there and to register voters. So if everything just stays the same, I think you see a moderate to conservative Nevada tilt until these unions can get back into business. So to answer your question, I think a lot of these unions, a lot of these organizations have a tendency of voting to the left. People have lost their jobs. They're going back to the states where they came in. There's a lot of people in Nevada that don't believe they're from Nevada. They say, I'm from California, I'm from Michigan, I'm from Florida, and they're going back right now with the level of unemployment we have right now. Telling you all of that, I believe it does help Donald Trump. I think it's the base, the Democratic base, that is hurting in this recession, and that they're actually losing voters as we speak today because there's no jobs in Southern Nevada.
We want to keep our audience up to speed on what's going on with the convention. We now have Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, who has come out at the venue where the president will speak a short time from now, and she is giving her address right now to a fairly large crowd, it looks like, on folding chairs out there on the lawn at the White House. We'll keep you up to speed on that as it develops. Senator Heller, I wanted to ask you about a different question, which is health care. If we go all the way back in time to 2 years ago in the midterm election, health care loomed large in a lot of the races across the country. And on that one, I think it's fair to say Vice President Biden does have a plan, does have a health care plan. You can like it or not like it. It basically says we want to get to more coverage of health care, and we want to have a private option. We don't want to take away your private insurance. So what is the Republican plan? Have we heard a plan from President Trump? Because I'm not sure I caught it.
And you've asked the right question. I do believe that is the strongest message that Democrats have right now, is that they do have a plan. That plan may be Medicare for all. And like you said, whether you like it or don't like it, what is the Republican alternative today? And I was in Congress and in the Senate when we wrestled with that particular question. I don't think we answered it satisfactorily. I think that it still could be a big, huge issue here going into this election. And I do believe that the Democrats have control of that particular message, especially when it comes to the cost of pharmaceuticals. Go out there, try to get onto whatever form of Obamacare that's out there right now. Take a look at those premiums, and you're unemployed. It is unaffordable today. And I think healthcare, that question that you just asked, needs to be answered by Donald Trump, and I don't believe he's done that today.
Okay. Senator, really appreciate your being with us. It was truly helpful, I must say. That's Dean Heller. He's former Republican senator from Nevada. Coming up, coronavirus deaths in the U.S. now top 180,000 people. What the White House has gotten right in their response and what it could have done better. We get the view from Home Depot co-founder Ken Langone next. Plus, as we said, Ivanka Trump is right now addressing the Republican National Convention in front of the White House. And this is coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg television and on radio.
Celebrated, and where people of all backgrounds, races, genders, and creeds have the chance to achieve their God-given potential. This is the future my father is working to build each and every day.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Give you a sense of the real-time action. The 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
Welcome back to special coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Income inequality has become an even larger issue in the United States as the coronavirus has exposed how badly those less fortunate have been hit. Our colleague Kaylee Lyons is back with a report on this very important issue.
Well, David, we know the coronavirus pandemic has brought the entire U.S. economy to its knees, and President Trump's argument to the American people is that he is the best steward for it, best positioned to lead us in the recovery. He in part wants to do that through tax cuts, as we've discussed, and he's promised to return us to record low unemployment. The question is, can he make the economy work for everyone? It certainly seems to be working for his base. A CBS poll just last weekend showed 70% of Republican voters say the economy is in good shape. That is in part possibly due to data like that, which I saw on Indeed.com, that the unemployment rate for Democrats is near 12%, for Republicans a much lower 7.6%. But this, as we know, goes beyond partisan politics. There's also the broader issue of inequality, and you spoke to Carly Fiorina, the former Hewlett-Packard CEO and a former presidential candidate herself, about that earlier today.
In the long term, we have issues that are holding our economy back. Our inequitable education system is holding this economy back over the long term. Racial injustice is holding this economy back in the long term. Communities that cannot participate, low-income workers who barely can make enough to survive, all that actually does hold the economy back.
Okay, so let's tackle the income inequality part of this conversation first, because we know that low-income workers are feeling the most pain right now. From February until now, employment for those making less than $27,000 a year has fallen 16%. For those making $60,000 or more, it's only fallen by half of 1%. This is a massive divergence, and President Trump has to make the case to those at the lower end of the spectrum that he can help them. Then on to the racial inequality issue. The Peterson Institute for International Economics put out some research on what would happen if we don't get renewed COVID-19 income support plans. They say that would lead to a drop in consumption and, as a result, a 4% decline in total employment. But minority workers would be the most affected by that. For white workers, they would see employment fall about 3.9% in Peterson's view. For black workers, it's a larger 4.3% decline. Not only does that underscore the need for more fiscal stimulus here in the U.S., but also, as we are seeing racial injustice issues coming to the forefront, we have to keep the economic part of that equation in mind, David.
Thank you so much to Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons for all those great contributions this evening. Ken Langone, investor, philanthropist, and co-founder of Home Depot, has strong views on a wide range of subjects, including the economy and what it needs. I spoke earlier today with Ken.
I'm very concerned about when does the rest of the world say, America, we no longer want to hold your debt. We got what? $28 trillion in debt now. Okay. I think I give the Fed and the government credit for doing what they had to do because the economy was in intensive care in March, April, May, and June. And the name of the game is to live to fight another day. I think we've done as much as we can do to give us a chance to recover. But the bigger issue to me is how do we deal now with the consequences of what we've done? Now, for example, there may be a greater need for more stimulus. Okay? I heard the other day, I took some Home Depot store managers to lunch. We have people that work 1 or 2 days a week, part-time. And by virtue of this last law, they're going to make $800 or $900 a week by not working. Well, that's simple economics. Why the hell would I want to go to work if I can sit here and watch David Weston on television and make multiples of what I'm making by going to work? So, but they did that because over the short term, this is what they had to do. And I commend them for doing it. I think they threw philosophical beliefs to the wind and said, hey, wait a minute, we're dying of massive hemorrhage. We got to figure out how to stop the bleeding. And we did that. Going forward, we're in Never Neverland. I'm waiting to hear what Powell says today. My guess is what he's going to say is they're not going to be so aggressive in raising rates if inflation goes above 2%. In other words, I think low rates are going to be with us for a lot longer, beyond the recovery. And I worry about that because people that live depending on income off their investments. I mean, I don't know. Well, I guess I just saw the yield on 10-year treasuries was 71 basis points. I can guarantee you one thing. You buy a 10-year bond right now, you're asking for losses over the next 10 years. I don't know when rates will go up, but they will go up. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they won't go up for 10 years. And I guess 71 basis points is a pretty good rate of return if that happens.
Ken, what about a world in which the Federal Reserve says we have two mandates, it's jobs and price stability, but as between the two, we're now going to put our thumb on the scale on the side of jobs and not worry quite as much about price stability. That is to say, we're willing to let the inflation rise above 2%. What about that world?
I say to you, how significant is the difference going to be? Are they going to say, if we go to 6% inflation, we're still not going to change rates? Well, all you're going to do in that scenario is you're going to inflame inflation. You're going to put more money in more people. People are going to have incentives for taking risks that they shouldn't be doing. Look, I think we can say with a high level of certainty, none of us have been through this ever before. None of us. We're right now in virgin territory. And we can't say what works and what doesn't work until after we've been through it. I think right now, I think we're doing all we can do right now. I would be cautious that we don't stay too long, let the party last for too long.
That was part of my interview with Ken Langone. He's Home Depot co-founder. And right now, Ivanka Trump, daughter of President Trump, is speaking to the convention on the lawn at the White House. Let's listen to her as we wait for President Trump, who will follow her.
Drugs, despite fielding angry calls from the CEOs of nearly every major pharmaceutical company. Now, when we see attack ads paid for by Big Pharma, my dad smiles and says to me, you know, we're doing something really right if they're hitting us so hard. This spring, our president saw that American crops were going to waste because food supply chains were disrupted by the virus. He directed Secretary Perdue and me to find a way to get this nutritious food, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, and dairy, to families most in need. Within a matter of days, we launched the Farmers to Family Food Box program, which has now delivered over 100 million meals into the hands of American families. To protect the most vulnerable among us, I've worked alongside the president as he signed into law 9 pieces of legislation to combat the evil of human trafficking. I've stood by my father's side at Dover Air Force Base as he's received our fallen heroes, and each time it has steeled his resolve to finally stop the endless foreign wars. To change the paradigm in the Middle East, he took a fresh approach. I heard foreign leaders beg him not to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, yet he delivered on a promise also made and unfulfilled by past presidents because my father knew that it was the right thing to do. Defying all expectations, just weeks ago, he rewrote history again by making a peace agreement in the Middle East, the biggest breakthrough in a quarter century. For the first time in a long time, we have a president who has called out Washington's hypocrisy, and they hate him for it. Dad, people attack you for being unconventional, but I love you for being real, and I respect you for being effective. Our president refuses to surrender his beliefs to score point with the political elite. To my father, you are the elite. You are the only people he cares about scoring points with. If these problems were easy to solve, previous presidents would have done so. But you don't achieve different results by doing things the same way. Washington has not changed Donald Trump. Donald Trump has changed Washington. America doesn't need another empty vessel who will do whatever the media and the fringe of his party demands. Now more than ever, America needs 4 more years of a warrior in the White House. Tonight, I could not be more proud to introduce my father, a man I know was made for this moment in history. My fellow Americans, our First Lady, and the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
We have been listening to Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter, introduce him, and now the President and the First Lady come out to the balcony overlooking the crowd that is assembled on the lawn there. The standing ovation cloud, and now they come across and will come down from the balcony to the podium where Ivanka Trump was just addressing the crowd. A fairly large crowd. I don't have the number on it. I think I saw 1,500, but I don't know. Somebody could check on that. In folding chairs out there. I will editorialize, I don't see a lot of masks, but maybe they've all been tested very carefully. I don't know. And here he is, the President of the United States, with Melania Trump walking down the steps for him to give his address. He's expected to go for a full hour tonight. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see how many applause lines there are, which could take it even longer than that. This will be, of course, his one and only time addressing a convention as the President of the United States. 4 years ago, he was a candidate that some people really did not give much of a chance for winning. Melania Trump is in a very bright green dress, contrasting with the American flags arrayed behind them. There's been a gentle breeze. It appears to be a lovely evening in Washington. There's Ivanka Trump walking across to her father as they stand on the podium. And they're playing the country song. I love to say to America, because America is free. Somebody help me with that song. I know that song. I love the USA. So President Trump has been out and about the entire week. Of course, we've seen him every night in one capacity or another, sometimes more than once in a night. But the reports are he's been going almost 24 hours a day. He's clearly very energized. Let's be frank, he's been working from home a lot too and not been able to go out to these big rallies, which he enjoys so much. He gets so much energy from the crowd, and the crowd from him, I think it's fair to say, having been to one of those rallies myself. And so he is now unleashed. He gets to come out in a live venue at the White House. White House that some people have said is rather controversial that he's using the White House actually as the backdrop for what is undoubtedly a political speech, as he's going to lay out the reasons why he should be elected for a second term, and he is not in a big rush to start his speech, I think it's fair to say. Jeannie, any of the reactions here to what we heard from Ivanka Trump?
Yeah, she gave a really rousing welcome to her father, who looks like he's going to speak any moment now.
4 more years is the chant. We've heard that before this week, too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Friends, delegates, and distinguished guests, please. I stand before you tonight, honored by your support, proud of the extraordinary progress we have made together over the last 4 incredible years, and brimming with confidence in the bright future we will build for America over the next 4 years. We begin this evening. Our thoughts are with the wonderful people who have just come through the wrath of Hurricane Laura. We are working closely with state and local officials in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, sparing no effort to save lives. While the hurricane was fierce, one of the strongest to make landfall in 150 years, the casualties and damage were far less than thought possible only 24 hours ago. And this is due to the great work of FEMA, law enforcement, and the individual states. I will be going this weekend, and congratulations, thank you for that great job out there. We really appreciate it. We are one national family, and we will always protect, love, and care for each other. Here tonight are the people who have made my journey possible and filled my life with so much joy. For her incredible service to our nation and its children, I want to thank our magnificent First Lady. I also want to thank my amazing daughter, Ivanka, for that introduction, and to all of my children. Ivanka, please stand up. Great job. And to all of my children and grandchildren, I love you more than words can express. I know my brother Robert is looking down on us right now from heaven. He was a great brother and was very proud of the job we are all doing. Thank you. We love you, Robert. Let us also take a moment to show our profound appreciation for a man who has always fought by our side and stood up for our values, a man of deep faith and steadfast conviction, our Vice President Mike Pence. And Mike is joined by his beloved wife, a teacher, and military mom, Karen Pence. Thank you, Karen. My fellow Americans, tonight, with a heart full of gratitude and boundless optimism, I profoundly accept this nomination for President of the United States. the Republican Party, the party of Abraham Lincoln, goes forward united, determined, and ready to welcome millions of Democrats, independents, and anyone who believes in the greatness of America and the righteous heart of the American people. In a new term as president, we will again build the greatest economy in history, quickly returning to full employment, soaring incomes, and record prosperity. We will defend America against all threats and protect America against all dangers. We will lead America into new frontiers of ambition and discovery, and we will reach for new heights of national achievement. We will rekindle new faith in our values, new pride in our history, and a new spirit of unity that can only be realized through love for our great country. Because we understand that America is not a land cloaked in darkness. America is the torch that enlightens the entire world. Gathered here at our beautiful and majestic White House, known all over the world as the People's House, we cannot help but marvel at the miracle that is our great American story. This has been the home of larger-than-life figures like Teddy Roosevelt and Andrew Jackson, who rallied Americans to bold visions of a bigger and brighter future. Within these walls lived tenacious generals like President Grant and Eisenhower, who led our soldiers in the cause of freedom. From these grounds, Thomas Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on a daring expedition to cross a wild and uncharted continent. In the depths of a bloody civil war, President Abraham Lincoln looked out these very windows upon a half-completed Washington Monument and asked God, in his providence, to save our nation. 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt welcomed Winston Churchill, and just inside, they set our people on a course to victory in the Second World War. In recent months, our nation and the entire planet has been struck by a new and powerful, invisible enemy. Like those brave Americans before us, we are meeting this challenge. We are delivering life-saving therapies and will produce a vaccine before the end of the year, or maybe even sooner. We will defeat the virus, end the pandemic, and emerge stronger than ever before. What united generations past was an unshakable confidence in America's destiny and an unbreakable faith in the American people. They knew that our country is blessed by God and has a special purpose in this world. It is that conviction that inspired the formation of our union, our westward expansion, the abolition of slavery, the passage of civil rights, the space program, and the overthrow of fascism, tyranny, and communism. This towering American spirit has prevailed over every challenge and lifted us to the summit of human endeavor. And yet, despite all of our greatness as a nation, everything we have achieved is now in danger. This is the most important election in the history of our country. Thank you. At no time before have voters faced a clearer choice between two parties, two visions, two philosophies, or two agendas. This election will decide whether we save the American dream or whether we allow a socialist agenda to demolish our cherished destiny. It will decide whether we rapidly create millions of high-paying jobs or whether we crush our industries and send millions of these jobs overseas, as has foolishly been done for many decades. Your vote will decide whether we protect law-abiding Americans or whether we give free rein to violent anarchists and agitators and criminals who threaten our citizens. And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it. That won't happen. At the Democrat National Convention, Joe Biden and his party repeatedly assailed America as a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. So tonight I ask you a simple question. How can the Democrat Party ask to lead our country when it spends so much time tearing down our country? In the left's backward view, they do not see America as the most free, just, and exceptional nation on earth. Instead, they see a wicked nation that must be punished for its sins. Our opponents say that redemption for you can only come from giving power to them. This is a tired anthem spoken by every repressive movement throughout history. But in this country, we don't look to career politicians for salvation. In America, we don't turn to government to restore our souls. We put our faith in Almighty God. Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. He is the destroyer of America's jobs, and if given the chance, he will be the destroyer of American greatness. For 47 years, Joe Biden took the donations of blue-collar workers, gave them hugs and even kisses, and told them he felt their pain. And then he flew back to Washington and voted to ship our jobs to China and many other distant lands. Joe Biden spent his entire career outsourcing their dreams and the dreams of American workers, offshoring their jobs, opening their borders, and sending their sons and daughters to fight in endless foreign wars, wars that never ended. 4 years ago, I ran for president because I could not watch this betrayal of our country any longer. I could not sit by as career politicians let other countries take advantage of us on trade, borders, foreign policy, and national defense. Our NATO partners, as an example, were very far behind in their defense payments. But at my strong urging, they agreed to pay $130 billion more a year, the first time in over 20 years that they upped their payments. And this $130 billion will ultimately go to $400 billion a year. And Secretary General Stoltenberg, who heads NATO, was amazed after watching for so many years and said that President Trump did what no one else was able to do. Thank you. From the moment I left my former life behind, and it was a good life, I have done nothing but fight for you. I did what our political establishment never expected and could never forgive, breaking the cardinal rule of Washington politics. I kept my promise. Together, we have ended the rule of the failed political class, and they are desperate to get their power back by any means necessary. You've seen that. They are angry at me because instead of putting them first, I very simply said, America first. Thank you. Days after taking office, we shocked the Washington establishment and withdrew from the last administration's job-killing Trans-Pacific Partnership. I then immediately approved the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines, ended the unfair and very costly Paris Climate Accord, and secured for the first time American energy independence. We passed record-setting tax and regulation cuts at a rate nobody had ever seen before. Within 3 short years, we built the strongest economy in the history of the world. Washington insiders asked me not to stand up to China. They pleaded with me to let China continue stealing our jobs, ripping us off, and robbing our country blind. But I kept my word to the American people. We took the toughest, boldest, strongest, and hardest-hitting action against China in American history by far. They said that it would be impossible to terminate and replace NAFTA. But again, they were wrong. Earlier this year, I ended the NAFTA nightmare and signed the brand new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement into law. And right now, auto companies and others are building their plants and factories in America, not firing their employees and not deserting us for other countries. In perhaps no area did the Washington special interests try harder to stop us than on my policy of pro-American immigration. But I refuse to back down, and today America's borders are more secure than ever before. Thank you. We ended catch and release, stopped asylum fraud, took down human traffickers who prey on women and children, and we have deported 20,000 gang members and 500,000 criminal aliens. We have already built 300 miles of border wall, and we are adding 10 new miles every single week. The wall will soon be complete, and it is working beyond our wildest expectations. We are joined this evening by members of the Border Patrol Union representing our country's courageous border agents. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Brave, brave people. You see, this country loves our law enforcement. They do. They do. They really do. Love and respect. When I learned that the Tennessee Valley Authority laid off hundreds of American workers and forced them to train their lower-paid foreign replacement, I promptly removed the chairman of the board. And now those talented American workers have been rehired and are back providing power to Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Virginia. They have their old jobs back, and some are here with us this evening. Please stand. You went through a lot. Please stand. Thank you. Thank you very much. You've been through a lot. Thank you very much. Last month, I took on Big Pharma. You think that's easy? It's not. And signed orders that will massively lower the cost of your prescription drugs and give critically ill patients access to life-saving cures. We passed the decades-long-awaited right to try. Right to try. We also passed VA accountability and VA choice. Our great veterans, we're taking care of our veterans. 91% approval rating this month, the VA, given by our veterans. First time anything like that's ever happened. By the end of my first term, we will have approved more than 300 federal judges, including 2 great new Supreme Court justices. And to bring prosperity to our forgotten inner cities, we worked hard to pass historic criminal justice reform, prison reform, opportunity zones, and long-term funding of historically black colleges and universities. And before the China virus came in, produced the best unemployment numbers for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans ever recorded. And I say very modestly that I have done more for the African-American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln, our first Republican president. And I have done more in 3 years for the black community than Joe Biden has done in 47 years. And when I'm reelected, the best is yet to come. Thank you very much. When I took office, the Middle East was in total chaos. ISIS was rampaging, Iran was on the rise, and the war in Afghanistan had no end in sight. I withdrew from the terrible one-sided Iran nuclear deal. Unlike many presidents before me, I kept my promise, recognized Israel's true capital, and moved our embassy to Jerusalem. But not only did we talk about it as a future site, we got it built. Rather than spending $1 billion on a new building as planned, we took an already owned existing building in a better location. Real estate deal, right? And opened it at a cost of less than $500,000. Many things like that government is doing right now. We also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And this month we achieved the first Middle East peace deal in 25 years. Thank you to UAE. Thank you to Israel. In addition, we obliterated 100% of the ISIS caliphate and killed its founder and leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Then, in a separate operation, we eliminated the world's #1 terrorist by far, Qasem Soleimani. Unlike previous administrations, I have kept America out of new wars, and our troops are coming home. We have spent nearly $2.5 trillion on completely rebuilding our military, which was very badly depleted when I took office, as you know. This includes 3 separate pay raises for our great warriors. We also launched the Space Force, the first new branch of the United States military since the Air Force was created almost 75 years ago. We have spent the last 4 years reversing the damage Joe Biden inflicted over the last 47 years. Biden's record is a shameful roll call of the most catastrophic betrayals and blunders in our lifetime. He has spent his entire career on the wrong side of history. Biden voted for the NAFTA disaster, the single worst trade deal ever enacted. He supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization, one of the greatest economic disasters of all time. After those Biden calamities, the United States lost 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs. We laid off workers in Michigan, Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and many other states. They didn't want to hear Biden's hollow words of empathy. They wanted their jobs back. As vice president, he supported the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have been a death sentence for the U.S. auto industry. He backed the horrendous South Korea trade deal, which took many jobs from our country and which I've reversed and made a great deal for our country. He repeatedly supported mass amnesty for illegal immigrants. He voted for the Iraq War. He opposed the mission to take out Osama bin Laden. He opposed killing Soleimani. He oversaw the rise of ISIS and cheered the rise of China as a positive development for America and the world, some positive development. That's why China supports Joe Biden and desperately wants him to win. I can tell you that upon very good information. China would own our country if Joe Biden got elected. Unlike Biden, I will hold them fully accountable for the tragedy that they caused all over the world. In recent months, our nation and the world has been hit by the once-in-a-century pandemic that China allowed to spread around the globe. They could have stopped it, but they allowed it to come out. We are grateful to be joined tonight by several of our incredible nurses and first responders. Please stand and accept our profound thanks and gratitude. Many Americans, including me, have sadly lost friends and cherished loved ones to this horrible disease. As one nation, we mourn, we grieve, and we hold in our hearts forever the memories of all of those lives that have been so tragically taken, so unnecessary. In their honor, we will unite. In their memory, we will overcome. And when the China virus hit, we launched the largest national mobilization since World War II. Invoking the Defense Production Act, we produced the world's largest supply of ventilators. Not a single American who has needed a ventilator has been denied a ventilator, which is a miracle. Good job heading the task force by our great Vice President. Thank you very much, Mark. Please stand up. We shipped hundreds of millions of masks, gloves, and gowns to our frontline healthcare workers. To protect our nation's seniors, we rushed supplies, testing kits, and personal to nursing homes. We gave everything you can possibly give, and we're still giving it because we're taking care of our senior citizens. The Army Corps of Engineers built field hospitals, and the Navy deployed our great hospital ships. We developed from scratch the largest and most advanced testing system anywhere in the world. America has tested more than every country in Europe put together, and more than every nation in the Western Hemisphere combined. Think of that. We have conducted 40 million more tests than the next closest nation, which is India. We developed a wide array of effective treatments, including a powerful antibody treatment known as convalescent plasma. You saw that on Sunday night when we announced it, that will save thousands and thousands of lives. Thanks to advances, we have pioneered the fatality rate, and you look at it and you look at the numbers, it has been reduced by 80% since April, 80%. The United States has among the lowest case fatality rates of any major country anywhere in the world. The European Union's case fatality rate is nearly 3 times higher than ours, but you don't hear that. They don't write about that. They don't want to write about that. They don't want you to know those things. Altogether, the nations of Europe have experienced a 30% greater increase in excess mortality than the United States. Think of that. We enacted the largest package of financial relief in American history. Thanks to our Paycheck Protection Program, we have saved or supported more than 50 million American jobs. That's one of the reasons that we're advancing so rapidly with our economy. Great job. As a result, we have seen the smallest economic contraction of any major Western nation, and we are recovering at a much faster rate than anybody. Over the past 3 months, we have gained over 9 million jobs, and that's a record in the history of our country. Unfortunately, from the beginning, our opponents have shown themselves capable of nothing but a partisan ability to criticize. When I took bold action to issue a travel ban on China very early indeed, Joe Biden called it hysterical and xenophobic. And then I introduced a ban on Europe very early again. If we had listened to Joe, hundreds of thousands more Americans would have died. Instead of following the science, Joe Biden wants to inflict a painful shutdown on the entire country. His shutdown would inflict unthinkable and lasting harm on our nation's children, families, and citizens of all backgrounds. The cost of the Biden shutdown would be measured in increased drug overdoses, depression, alcohol addiction, suicides, heart attacks, economic devastation, job loss, and much more. Joe Biden's plan is not a solution to the virus, but rather it's a surrender to the virus. My administration has a very different approach. To save as many lives as possible, we are focusing on the science, the facts, and the data. We are aggressively sheltering those at highest risk, especially the elderly, while allowing lower-risk Americans to safely return to work and to school. And we want to see so many of those great states be opened by Democrats. We want them to be open. They have to be open. They have to get back to work. They have to get back to work, and they have to get back to school. Most importantly, we are marshaling America's scientific genius to produce a vaccine in record time. Under Operation Warp Speed, we have 3 different vaccines in the final stage of trials. Right now, years ahead of what has been achieved before. Nobody thought it could ever be done this fast. Normally, it would be years, and we did it in a matter of a few months. We're producing them in advance so that hundreds of millions of doses will be quickly available. We will have a safe and effective vaccine this year, and together we will crush the virus. At the Democrat convention, you barely heard a word about their agenda. But that's not because they don't have one. It's because their agenda is the most extreme set of proposals ever put forward by a major party nominee. Joe Biden may claim he is an ally of the light, but when it comes to his agenda, Biden wants to keep us completely in the dark. He doesn't have a clue. He has pledged a $4 trillion tax hike on almost all American families, which will totally collapse our rapidly improving economy. And once again, record stock markets that we have right now will also collapse. That means your 401ks, that means all of the stocks that you have. On the other hand, just as I did in my first term, I will cut taxes even further for hardworking moms and dads. I will not raise taxes. I will cut them, and very substantially. And we will also provide tax credits to bring jobs out of China back to America, and we will impose tariffs on any company that leaves America to produce jobs overseas. We will make sure our companies and jobs stay in our country, as I've already been doing for quite some time, if you've noticed. Joe Biden's agenda is made in China. My agenda is made in the USA. Biden has promised to abolish the production of American oil, coal, shale, and natural gas, laying waste to the economies of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico, destroying those states, absolutely destroying those states and others. Millions of jobs will be lost, and energy prices will soar. These same policies led to crippling power outages in California just last week. Everybody saw that. Tremendous power outage. Nobody's seen anything like it, but we saw that last week in California. How can Joe Biden claim to be an ally of the light when his own party can't even keep the lights on? Joe Biden's campaign has even published a 110-page policy platform. You can't get away from this. Co-authored with far-left Senator crazy Bernie Sanders. The Biden-Bernie manifesto calls for suspending all removals of illegal aliens, implementing nationwide catch and release, and providing illegal aliens with free taxpayer-funded lawyers. Everybody gets a lawyer. Come on over to our country. Everybody has a lawyer. We have a lawyer for you. That's what we need is more lawyers. Joe Biden recently raised his hand on the debate stage and promised to your giveaway, he was going to give it away, your health care dollars to illegal immigrants, which is going to bring massive number of immigrants into our country. Massive numbers will pour into our country in order to get all of the goodies that they want to give, education, health care, everything. He also supports deadly sanctuary cities that protect criminal aliens. He promised to end national security travel bans from jihadist nations, and he pledged to increase refugee admissions by 700%. This is in the manifesto. The Biden plan would eliminate America's borders in the middle of a global pandemic, and he's even talking about taking the wall down. How about that? Biden also vowed to oppose school choice and close all charter schools, ripping away the ladder of opportunity for Black and Hispanic children. In a second term, I will expand charter schools and provide school choice to every family in America. And we will always treat our teachers with the tremendous respect that they deserve. Great people. Great, great people. Joe Biden claims he has empathy for the vulnerable, yet the party he leads supports the extreme late-term abortion of defenseless babies right up until the moment of birth. Democrat leaders talk about moral decency, but they have no problem with stopping a baby's beating heart in the 9th month of pregnancy. Democrat politicians refuse to protect innocent life, and then they lecture us about morality and saving America's soul. Tonight, we proudly declare that all children, born and unborn, have a God-given right to life. During the Democrat convention, the words "under God" were removed from the Pledge of Allegiance. Not once, but twice. We will never do that. But the fact is, this is where they're coming from. Like it or not, this is where they're coming from. If the left gains power, they will demolish the suburbs, confiscate your guns, and appoint justices who will wipe away your Second Amendment and other constitutional freedoms. Biden is a Trojan horse for socialism. If Joe Biden doesn't have the strength to stand up to wild-eyed Marxists like Bernie Sanders and his fellow radicals, and there are many, we see them all the time, it's incredible actually, then how is he ever going to stand up for you? He's not. The most dangerous aspect of the Biden platform is the attack on public safety. The Biden-Bernie manifesto calls for abolishing cash bail, immediately releasing 400,000 criminals onto the streets and into your neighborhoods. When asked if he supports cutting police funding, Joe Biden replied, yes, absolutely. When Congresswoman Ilhan Omar called the Minneapolis Police Department a cancer that is rotten to the root, Biden wouldn't disavow her support and reject her endorsement. He proudly displayed it shortly later on his website. Displayed it in big letters. Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. My administration will always stand with the men and women of law enforcement. Every day, police officers risk their lives to keep us safe, and every year, many sacrifice their lives in the line of duty. One of these incredible Americans was Detective Miostas Familia. She was part of a team of American heroes called the NYPD, or New York's Finest, who I was very, very proud to get their endorsement just the other day. Great people, great people. They were allowed to do their job. You'd have no crime in New York. Rudy Giuliani knows that better than anybody. Thank you, Rudy. 3 years ago, on the 4th of July weekend, Detective Familia was on duty in her vehicle when she was ambushed just after midnight and murdered by a monster who hated her purely for wearing the badge. Detective Familia was a single mom. She recently asked for the night shift so she could spend more time with her kids. 2 years ago, I stood in front of the U.S. Capitol alongside those beautiful children and held their grandmother's hand as they mourned their terrible loss, and we honored Detective Familia's extraordinary life. It was extraordinary. Detective Familia's 3 children are with us this evening. Genesis, Peter, Delilah, we are so grateful to have you here tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I promise you that we will treasure your mom in our memories forever. We must remember that the overwhelming majority of police officers in this country, and that's the overwhelming majority, are noble, courageous, and honorable. We have to give law enforcement, our police, back their power. They are afraid to act. They are afraid to lose their pension. They are afraid to lose their jobs. And by being afraid, they are not able to do the job that they so desperately want to do for you. And those who suffer most are the great people who they protect and who they want to protect at an even higher level. When there is police misconduct, the justice system must hold wrongdoers fully and completely accountable, and it will. But when we can never have a situation where things are going on as they are today, we must never allow mob rule. We can never allow mob rule. In the strongest possible terms, the Republican Party condemns the rioting, looting, arson, and violence we have seen in Democrat-run cities all, like Kenosha, Minneapolis, Portland, Chicago, and New York, and many others, Democrat-run. There is violence and danger in the streets of many Democrat-run cities throughout America. This problem could easily be fixed if they wanted to. Just call. We're ready to go in. We'll take care of your problem in a matter of hours. Just call. We have to wait for the call. It's too bad we have to, but we have to wait for the call. We must always have law and order. All federal crimes are being investigated, prosecuted, and punished to the fullest extent of the law. When the anarchists started ripping down our statues and monuments right outside, I signed an order immediately, 10 years in prison, and it was a miracle. It all stopped. No more statues. They said, that's just too long, as they looked at a statue. I think we'll rip it down. Then they said 10 years in prison. I think that's too long. Let's go home. During their convention, Joe Biden and his supporters remained completely silent about the rioters and criminals spreading mayhem in Democrat-run cities. They never even mentioned it during their entire convention. Never once mentioned. Now they're starting to mention it because their poll numbers are going down like a rock in water. It's too late, Joe. In the face of left-wing anarchy and mayhem in Minneapolis, Chicago, and other cities, Joe Biden's campaign did not condemn it. They donated to it. At least 13 members of Joe Biden's campaign staff donated to a fund to bail out vandals, arsonists, anarchists, looters, and rioters from jail. Here tonight is the grieving family of retired police captain David Dorn, a 38-year veteran of the St. Louis Police Department, a great man and a highly respected man by all. In June, Captain Dorn was shot and killed as he tried to protect a store from rioters and looters, or as the Democrats would call them, peaceful protesters. They call them peaceful protesters. We're honored to be joined tonight by his wonderful wife, Ann, and beloved family members, Brian and Kaylin. To each of you, we will never forget the heroic legacy of Captain David Dorn. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great man. Great man. As long as I am president, we will defend the absolute right of every American citizen to live in security, dignity, and peace. If the Democrat Party wants to stand with anarchists, agitators, rioters, looters, and flag burners, that is up to them. But I, as your president, will not be a part of it. The Republican Party will remain the voice of the patriotic heroes who keep America safe and salute the American flag. Last year, over 1,000 African Americans were murdered as a result of violent crime in just 4 Democrat-run cities. The top 10 most dangerous cities in the country are run by Democrats and have been for many decades. Thousands more African Americans are victims of violent crime in these communities. Joe Biden and the left ignore these American victims. I never will. If the radical left takes power, they will apply their disastrous policies to every city, town, and suburb in America. Just imagine if the so-called peaceful demonstrators in the streets were in charge of every lever of power in the U.S. government. Just think of that. Liberal politicians claim to be concerned about the strength of American institutions. But who exactly is attacking them? Who is hiring the radical professors, judges, and prosecutors? Who is trying to abolish immigration enforcement and establish speech codes designed to muzzle dissent? In every case, the attacks on American institutions are being waged by radical left. Always remember, they are coming after me because I am fighting for you. That's what's happening. And it's been going on from before I even got elected. And remember this, they spied on my campaign and they got caught. Let's see now what happens. We must reclaim our independence from the left's repressive mandates. Americans are exhausted trying to keep up with the latest list of approved words and phrases and the ever more restrictive political decrees. Many things have a different name now, and the rules are constantly changing. The goal of cancel culture is to make decent Americans live in fear of being fired, expelled, shamed, humiliated, and driven from society as we know it. The far left wants to coerce you into saying what you know to be false and scare you out of saying what you know to be true. Very sad. But on November 3rd, you can send them a very thundering message they will never forget. Thank you. Thank you very much. Joe Biden is weak. He takes his marching orders from liberal hypocrites who drive their cities into the ground while fleeing far from the scene of the wreckage. These same liberals want to eliminate school choice while they enroll their children in the finest private schools in the land. They want to open our borders while living in Waldorf compounds and communities in the best neighborhoods in the world. They want to defund the police while they have armed guards for themselves. This November, we must turn the page forever on this failed political class. The fact is, I'm here. What's the name of that building? But I'll say it differently. The fact is, we're here and they're not. To me, one of the most beautiful buildings anywhere in the world, and it's not a building, it's a home as far as I'm concerned. Not even a house, it's a home. It's a wonderful place with an incredible history. But it's all because of you. Together we will write the next chapter of the great American story. Over the next 4 years, we will make America into the manufacturing superpower of the world. We will expand opportunity zones. Thank you, Tim Scott. Bring home our medical supply chains, and we will end our resilience for bad things. We will go right after China. We will not rely on them one bit. We're taking our business out of China. We are bringing it home. We want our business to come home. We will continue to reduce taxes and regulations at levels not seen before. We will create 10 million jobs in the next 10 months, and it'll be higher than that. We will hire more police, increase penalties for assaults on law enforcement, and surge federal prosecutors into high-crime communities. We will ban deadly sanctuary cities and ensure that federal health care is protected for American citizens, not for illegal aliens. We will have strong borders. And I've said for years, without borders, we don't have a country. Don't have a country. Strike down terrorists who threaten our people and keep America out of endless and costly foreign wars. We will appoint prosecutors, judges, justices who believe in enforcing the law, not enforcing their own political agenda, which is illegal. We will ensure equal justice for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. We will uphold your religious liberty and defend your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And if we don't win, your Second Amendment doesn't have a chance. I can tell you that. I have totally protected it. We will protect Medicare and Social Security. We will always and very strongly protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And that is a pledge from the entire Republican Party. Thank you, Kevin. We will end surprise medical billing, require price transparency, and further reduce the cost of prescription drugs and health insurance premiums. They're coming way down. We will greatly expand energy development, continuing to remain the #1 in the world and keep America energy independent. And for those of you that still drive a car, look how low your gasoline bill is. You haven't seen that in a long time. We will win the race to 5G and build the world's best cyber and missile defense, already under construction. We will fully restore patriotic education to our schools and always protect. We will always, always protect free speech on college campuses. And we put a very big penalty in. If they do anything having to do with your free speech, colleges have to pay a tremendous, tremendous financial penalty. And again, it's amazing how open they've been lately. We will launch a new age of American ambition in space. America will land the first woman on the moon, and the United States will be the first nation to plant its beautiful flag on Mars. This is the unifying national agenda that will bring our country together. So tonight I say to all Americans, this is the most important election in the history of our country. There has never been such a difference between two parties or two individuals in ideology, philosophy, or vision than there is right now. Our opponents believe that America is a depraved nation. We want our sons and daughters to know the truth. America is the greatest and most exceptional nation in the history of the world. Our country wasn't built by cancel culture, speech codes, and soul-crushing conformity. We are not a nation of timid spirits. We are a nation of fierce, proud, and independent American patriots. We're a nation of pilgrims, pioneers, adventurers, explorers, and trailblazers who refuse to be tied down, held back, or in any way reined in. Americans have steel in their spines, grit in their souls, and fire in their hearts. There is no one like us on earth. I want every child in America to know that you are part of the most exciting and incredible adventure in human history. No matter where your family comes from, no matter your background in America, anyone can rise. With hard work, devotion, and drive, you can reach any goal and achieve every ambition. Our American ancestors sailed across the perilous ocean to build a new life on a new continent. They braved the freezing winters, crossed the raging rivers, scaled the rocky peaks, trekked the dangerous forests, and worked from dawn till dusk. These pioneers didn't have money, they didn't have fame, but they had each other. They loved their families, they loved their country, and they loved their God. When opportunity beckoned, they picked up their Bibles, packed up their belongings, climbed into their covered wagons, and set out west for the next adventure. Ranchers and miners, cowboys and sheriffs, farmers and settlers, they pressed on past the Mississippi to stake a claim in the wild frontier. Legends were born: Wyatt Earp, Annie Oakley, Davy Crockett, and Buffalo Bill. Americans built their beautiful homesteads on the open range. Soon they had churches and communities, then towns, and with time, great centers of industry and commerce. That is who they were. Americans build their future. We don't tear down our past. We are the nation that won a revolution, toppled tyranny and fascism, and delivered millions into freedom. We laid down the railroads, built the great ships, raised up the skyscrapers, revolutionized industry, and sparked a new age of scientific discovery. We set the trends in art and music, radio and film, sport and literature, and we did it all with style and confidence and flair, because that is who we are. Whenever our way of life was threatened, our heroes answered the call. From Yorktown to Gettysburg, from Normandy to Iwo Jima, American patriots raced into cannon blasts, bullets, and bayonets to rescue American liberty. They had no fear, but America didn't stop there. We looked into the sky and kept pressing onward. We built a 6 million pound rocket and launched it thousands of miles into space. We did it so that two brave patriots could stand tall and salute our wondrous American flag planted on the face of the moon. For America, nothing is impossible. Over the next 4 years, we will prove worthy of this magnificent legacy. We will reach stunning new heights, and we will show that the world, for America, there is a dream, and it is not beyond your reach. Together we are unstoppable. Together we are unbeatable, because together we are the proud citizens of the United States of America. And on November 3rd, we will make America safer. We will make America stronger. We will make America prouder. and we will make America greater than ever before. I am very, very proud to be the nominee of the Republican Party. I love you all. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
And there you have it, President Donald J. Trump's acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention, one that went just a bit over an hour and 10 minutes long, which is very long for any speech at a convention. Turns out it's actually a bit shorter, I believe, than the one he gave last time in 2016. He's out there on the lawn at the White House, and now we're seeing dramatic fireworks in the background. A fireworks demonstration. Remember, we had the same the night that Joe Biden accepted his nomination, but now we have a fireworks display. And now for some concluding thoughts here, let's go to our great contributors as well as our White House correspondent. Let's start with Mario Parker. Mario, you had talked before about what we should expect from this. What did you get and how did it differ, and if at all, from what you expected?
No, it was about on cue as to what we figured the notes the president would look to hit. He looked to differentiate himself from Joe Biden on both crime, immigration, and then also trade. He also kind of alluded to the unrest in Kenosha, Chicago, that's rolled across many of the large U.S. cities without really talking about the root cause of some of it.
Yeah, I have to say, for our radio audience in particular, watching these fireworks, they're very dramatic. They're over the Washington Monument. But they actually had some that came out and spelled out Trump, and then another set that came up and spelled out 2020, which is pretty impressive. I'm not sure I remember that sort of thing being done before. So Rick Davis, he hit an awful lot of things. I'm not sure if Joe Biden or the Biden campaign want to respond. It would take forever to respond to all the points that were made. And there were some in there that, let's be honest, people could take issue with, some factual assertions.
Yeah, I'm sure the fact checkers are going to be really busy tonight. By tomorrow morning, there'll be a lot of debate over what was and wasn't an exaggeration, or as the president likes to call it, hyperbole. I did find one thing in the speech that I think everybody in the country agrees with, both Republicans and Democrats and socialists alike. And that is, he said that this is the most important election in the history of our country. And I have absolutely no doubt that's going to find unanimous consent.
Well, that's a fascinating point, Jeannie, because I'm reminded actually of what was said at the Democratic convention, where they would say, democracy is at stake here. Your decision could really make or break democracy. We had Donald Trump tonight saying that this really would be the difference between the dreams of the country and demolishing our destiny. It's an important election, no question. But really, after all we've been through in this country, we've had civil wars, we've fought for our very lives, we've had terrorist attacks, we've had pandemics. Really, whom we choose for president could destroy the legacy of this country? That's pretty strong stuff.
It's strong stuff. And to your point, it's coming from both sides. And I think it speaks to the fact that both sides see it as critical to get their bases out. So they are pulling out all the stops. I think the reality is, the truth is, there is a stark choice between these two candidates. And, they are presenting such vastly different pictures of reality. You have the president out there acting as if he's not president of the United States, and the violence that's going on in places like Wisconsin has nothing to do with somebody else's problem and somebody else's fault, and he's going to be elected and fix that, right? And then you have the Democrats with their own view as to how things are going. So, I'm just struck by how different, if you watch these two events, how different the reality is. And I'm also have to say that watching this tonight, it is stunning to see a convention like this, an acceptance speech done at the White House. These are absolutely beautiful fireworks. We're seeing beautiful pictures. But the fact is, the president was even openly referencing the fact that he's making a political speech at the White House, something that, we have to remember. Sure, FDR made a speech on the radio accepting a nomination, but this is vastly different and something we just don't see in the modern era.
Yeah, not with visuals like that, that's for sure. So Mario Parker, you cover this president at the White House. Does the White House have any hesitation at all? Because it's not just giving this speech at the White House. I mean, we had the Secretary of State speaking from Jerusalem on an official trip. We've had all sorts of things that cross a line that at least has been respected in the past.
No, you're absolutely right. And not only that, but a lot of the images that we saw this evening during the speech, you saw a lot of the cabinet officials right there, front row and center. And as you mentioned, you had some cabinet officials that gave speeches as well. I think some of it is just emblematic of the fact that Donald Trump has really placed his fingerprints, his handprint, if you will, on this Republican Party and made it in his image. At least for right now.
And Rick, I was really struck by a couple of things we've heard from Donald Trump tonight and throughout this convention. Career politicians, contrasting him with a career politician. He's not a career politician. He will fight for you, and he kept his promises.
Yeah, considering 4 years in the presidency, he still thinks he's the outsider. And as Jeannie said, that he doesn't take any responsibility, it sounds like, for the country and the trajectory he's on. He actually thinks it's in the wrong track, and he's got to do these things to create safer cities and suburbs. So it really is an interesting approach to take as a man who actually has been running the country and the better part of the free world for the last 4 years. I think that will be fodder for Joe Biden and his team. I think that they will try to contrast his unwillingness to take responsibility for the condition the country's in. And voters are absolutely a vast majority saying we are headed in the wrong direction. So I'm not exactly sure the approach is going to work as well this time as it did last time when he really was the outsider waiting to get in.
And let's wrap it up on exactly that point, Jeannie, because tomorrow people go back to their concerns about their jobs and their houses and their well-being and putting food on the table. And I wonder how much this will stick either from last week or this week.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's going to, but I do think, one thing we should mention is that the president mentioned Joe Biden repeatedly in this speech. Joe Biden never mentioned Donald Trump in his acceptance speech. And that is another stark difference. And, you're right. This speech marks the kickoff of the rest of this campaign. And it is going to be, I think, one of the toughest fights that we've seen. In sort of modern campaigning, I think this is going to be a very, very tough fight, and I think it's going to be incredibly close in these swing states.
Yeah, I think actually this may have been a record for naming the opponent of any of these speeches. So we want to wrap it up now. We want to thank Bloomberg's Mario Parker and our political contributors Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital and Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Ivanka College. Thank you to all of you for being with us through this entire ordeal and experience at the same time. Coming up tomorrow, we will wrap up the conventions and take a look at the presidential race as it stands now on Balance of Power. That's at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. This has been coverage of the Republican National Convention on Bloomberg Television and on Bloomberg Radio.
True diversification. That's what adding commodities exposure to your stock and bond portfolio can help provide.